So what is a food system? Food systems are essentially webs of interactions from all of the processes and practices that are involved in producing food, distributing food, consuming food, and disposing of food. And so this is a typical example of a systems diagram. You're going to create your own systems diagram for a food component in the Canvas course. But food systems are all about how do we get our food, how do we use our food, how do we dispose of what's left of our food. And at each of these different parts of nodes in this web, at the production level, at the processing level, at the marketing level, there's inputs and outputs. There's energy going in, there's energy being out. There's nutrients going in, there's waste going out. There's resources going in, there's a loss of resources. And so when we're starting to think about food systems, one of the reasons that we do it is to try to find out what the impacts are, not just environmentally, but also socially and economically. And if we zoom out even more, what we find is that web of interactions, those food system components, are embedded in these bigger systems where there are environmental drivers. So these environmental factors that drive the food system. So that could be like air quality, water quality, soil quality, whether you're in the midst of a drought, whether you're in the midst of a hard freeze or something like that, that impacts the way that the food system operates. You have socioeconomic systems driving it too. So like the population gets bigger, food preferences change, or maybe you're in the midst of the recession, and how does that impact the food system? And then there are all of these different outcomes from the food systems, such as food security and the availability of food. And so we really are trying to think about the way that our food is produced and used and disposed of in light of this huge complex system. This takes years and years and years to study, but in the classroom, you can do a lot to investigate small parts of this system and really start to make a positive impact on the system in your community. So what are some of the food system challenges that we are facing? Here's just a few. So one important challenge is that our human population is growing. So we're expecting to be approaching 16 billion people by 2100. Right now we're at about 7.8 billion. And what that means is that we're going to have to feed all of these people. And as we start to feed more and more people, we start to run out of the resources to do that, which brings me to our next issue, which is land use. There's a video that is in Canvas. If I had a little bit more time, I would show it to you here, but basically it envisions, the earth as an apple, and the instructor will cut the apple in different ways to demonstrate like different proportions of parts of the earth. So if you cut the apple into 4 pieces, 3 pieces are the oceans, 1 piece is land. If you cut that into an eighth, one eighth of that is land that we have available for farming, for example. But what you get at is like the part of the earth that we have available for food production is a tiny, tiny sliver of the entire earth. And we have to be really, really careful with it, because as we use it, we can damage it. We can damage it permanently. We can damage it long term. Here's another food system challenge, which is food security. So that's a combination of 3 things: ensuring access to food for people across the world, ensuring that the food that they have is safe, nutritious, healthy, and ensuring that they have food sovereignty, which is the ability to make their own choices about the food that they eat and and how it gets to them, how it's produced and where it comes from. So that's another challenge for our generation and the generations beyond. Food waste, yeah. So you can see this is just one dump truck dumping tons and tons of what looks like perfectly edible food in a landfill. And that is not an uncommon experience. Lots and lots of food gets wasted. At every stage in the production of food, there's between 20 and 50% food waste, depending on where we are in the system, which is, I think, really important. Overconsumption. And one of the reasons that food gets wasted is this: you go to a restaurant and order a serving of food, and you get something that's roughly twice what you need to eat and twice what you consume. And this is something that impacts all of us. One of the things that I try to do whenever I'm working with people on sustainability systems is I like to focus not on the problems, but on the possible solutions or the possible innovations that can make things better. We have to explore the problems in depth. We have to evaluate them critically and think about them, but we also need to focus on providing solutions. So what are some of the innovations? Well, one of the innovations is the Green Revolution, which, you know, when I say this, a lot of people are going to feel uncomfortable, but it's what has allowed us to feed the growing population on Earth. And that means the industrialization of food. So that means moving from heavily labor-based farming practices to using machinery. That means including synthetic and industrial pesticides and fertilizers. That means growing varieties for greater yield and for shelf stability, by the way. You know, when you go to the store and you get a grocery store and you pick up an apple, that apple is probably 11 months old. So it's been sitting in storage for all of that time. And so varieties of foods have been grown and cultivated for that. And in some cases, that means genetically modifying our foods so that they are able to be cultivated easier. Now, that said, each of those innovations has tremendous problems that need to be addressed, you know, from the way that it damages soil and water and air to, you know, is it great to have an apple that's been sitting in storage for 11 months? Have you ever eaten a Red Delicious apple? They're not delicious at all. Those are the grossest apples. I apologize for Red Delicious aficionados there, but I find them really gross. And that is basically what is available to students in our cafeteria. That's a huge problem. But it has allowed us to dramatically increase food production. So you can see on this graph, huge increase in cereal production and cereal yields, for example, that matched the pace of our growing population. But look at land use at the bottom there. It really hasn't increased. And that's the result of these practices. So even though they have lots and lots of problems, we are able to feed the growing population with land that through these processes because it is incredibly efficient. There's also a common market or food hub, which is a way of connecting local and regional producers with local and regional consumers. So farmers markets, for example, are excellent ways of doing this. Community supported agriculture, or CSAs, are these like subscription services that allow people to have access to fresh food from local communities. And then there's something called regenerative agriculture, which is a way of growing livestock on land that maintains the soil fertility and improves the soil fertility so that you can grow crops better. And who wouldn't want that, right? If we look at a feedlot on the left here, that is a terrible, terrible environment, not just for those animals, but for people working there and for the surrounding community. I live in Chandler, Arizona. There are a peppering of small-ish feedlots. And on certain days, like the air quality from those feedlots is terrible. You can grow cows on pastures more intensively and with better quality for the cows and for the soil and for the workers using regenerative agricultural practices. And you rotate the crops, the cows with crops, and the crops do better because the soil has been fertilized with cow manure. It's just it's a a novel solution that has its roots in some pre-industrial strategies.